wanting of sensual objects, or rather wanting of objects that you derive pleasure from on the level of senses, that's what sensuality is. It's that wanting. So in order to abandon sensuality, you have to stop being concerned with the objects that you want and start developing not wanting of that wanting of the objects of senses. Of course, restraint needs to be done first, and then on the basis of that you can start discerning the nature of wanting of anything pretty much sensual. Not this, well, manifested through this or that, but overall it aims at anything that will give you the sensual pleasure. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touches. But for as long as you just, if you remain just focused with the objects that you want, you're failing to see the root of that sensuality. But consequently, if you develop not wanting in regard to wanting of sense objects, that's how you also overcome the sense objects. You lose concern with them because you uprooted them through developing not wanting of their wanting. So sensuality is the wanting of sensual objects. Welcoming, as the Buddha would say, he welcomes sensuality, entertains it, delights in it. That would be you wanting and accepting that wanting of sense objects at face value. So a skilled monk, a person who practices correctly, will then first be restrained, of course, and then start seeing that it's that wanting that's the problem. And then
not the sensual objects.
Not the sensual objects. Wanting is in regard to its wanting of the sensual objects. So that's what he should not welcome, entertain, delight in. So through not welcoming, entertaining and delighting the wanting of the sensual objects, you surmount the whole domain of sensuality, which is sensual objects and wanting of them. So that's what I mean when I say develop the not wanting of sensual objects. That's what it means. Don't delight, don't entertain, don't welcome the wanting of sensual objects. And that wanting of sensual objects, see, a person who doesn't see this will be either concerned with sensual objects, denying them, telling them, oh, it's ugly, it's impermanent, basically misapplying his efforts towards sense objects, failing to see that they're rooted in being wanted. That's the problem. They themselves are not problem. But then equally, he'll try to override that initial wanting of sensual objects, try to get rid of it, try to prevent it from arising. But you can't do that, because that's not on you. As the Buddha said, the eye wants to see the pleasant sights. The ear, nose, smell. Nose wants to smell, ear wants to hear, body wants to touch. That's just the structure of your experience. That's the five senses. That's how they operate. That's what we refer to as feeding grounds. So trying to interfere with that wanting of your sense objects is also taking it up. Exactly. So, and that's often people will misunderstand when the Buddha said you don't delight, you don't welcome, don't entertain it. Does not mean you deny that first arising. It means you see it as a whole. You see that there is the sense objects that are being wanted by the senses, basically. And that's what you don't delight in. That's what you don't want. You don't want to entertain the wanting of sensuality. But if wanting of sensuality has arisen, it's going to persist on its own as an arisen Dhamma, as an arisen phenomena, for as long as it persists. Your only concern is to not delight in it, not welcome it, not entertain it for any time during that duration. At any point in that duration, you always remain, no, but I don't want that. It remains unwanted. So like somebody comes in front of your door and wants to come in. But the only way to come in is if you welcome it and let it in. So in the beginning you might feel awkward and pressured and nervous because it's there, it's in front of the door, what if? And then you either go out or you welcome them out of the weakness or you engage with it one way or the other. But if you realize, well, wait a minute, it can't come in. It can stand there for hundreds of years if it wants. That's not my concern. My concern is to not welcome it inside. That's it. And surprise, surprise, if you start practicing like that, it will go away on its own. That's like the Mara's daughters. They're going to try and come and harass you for as long as they perceive a way in, a possibility of being allowed to come inside. And that's when they tried with the Buddha after his enlightenment, and there was nothing. They couldn't get in. And then the Mara told them off. Like, oh, I've been trying for years and you think you're gonna... But yeah, for those who don't practice like that, it's enough to just stand in front of the door and the person will cave in and start to engage out of whatever, pressure and uncomfortable or whatever. But if you recognize that, no, all I have to do is keep the door closed. Not like I try to chase them away, because that would be engaging with them.
Yeah.
Affirming or denying, either way you engage with it. So the only way to engage is, not engage, sorry, is to allow it to arise, whichever way it wants to arise, and then not welcome it. Don't open the door. Don't entertain it. Don't engage with it. And if you do that to the extent necessary, as in for the sufficient amount of time, it will stop coming. And that's how the other suttas we talked about and read, like, you establish your mind in the imperturbable in regard to sensuality. Because whether it's sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, whether it's like this, whether it's past, future, present, doesn't matter. You're not concerned with the content of it. You just maintain the attitude of not wanting the arisen wanting of these sense objects. That's it. And if you do that sufficient amount of time, the arising of the wanting of sense objects, it's going to change its significance. It's not going to be about sense objects anymore. It's going to be about, oh, this is that which is not welcomed. This is that which is not delighted in. This is that which is not wanted. This is that which used to be my sensuality, basically.
This used to mean...
Used to mean go after these objects because they are wanted. And you took that at a face value.
Or don't go after these things.
Or don't go after these things because they're not wanted. And you took that at a face value. Or rather, you wanted the absence of these things. Yeah. And you took that wanting at the face value. But now, you stop welcoming, stop entertaining, you stopped wanting the wanting of the sense objects.
So the significant changes.
While the objects remain the same. The whole domain remains the same. The eyes still have their feeding grounds, but now you conquer them, as the Buddha would say. Now they can't go and feed as wild animals used to do. You are the one in control. So the eye will get to eat only what the mind, who doesn't want any of it, allows it. And whatever it allows, it won't be a sensual thing, because that has been abandoned. Sensuality requires taking of that wanting for granted. That's why if you stop wanting the wanting of sense objects, you get to see the extent of that wanting in regard to the sense objects. You get to understand, as the Buddha would say, gratification of it, the extent, how far it can provide for you. By seeing that, you get to understand the danger of it. By not wanting the wanting of sense objects, you understood the danger liable within wanting of the sense objects. Because say you say yes to the wanting of pleasant sights, for example, and within the next 10 seconds you go blind. Or those sights are like quickly ripped away from you. Pleasing person or whatever. Would you be affected? Of course you would. But if you never given in to the original wanting of those sight, sound, smell, taste, touches, would you be affected? You wouldn't. Because you never took on that wanting. You never welcomed it in. That's the simile of that mango tree, where a man climbs the mango tree to eat the ripe mangoes, but then another man comes and also sees the mangoes, doesn't see the other man who's eating up at the top. But he can't climb the tree, so he decides to cut the tree down. He decides to take those sight, sound, smell, taste, touches for himself, whichever way he deemed appropriate. And if the other man who climbed the tree doesn't come down quickly, he's going to be destroyed or hurt, injured, killed or whatever. And that's the nature of sensuality. That directionality of wanting the sense objects is always directional, as in it's always going to take you one way or the other, which means you can't maintain the perspective on the domain. You have to commit to it and go with it, which then means you are not in control. And it's all well and good where the things are going the way you kind of wish them to go. but it's inconceivable that that's how they're going to always be. Not just from the side of your own senses failing, or could fail, or be affected by accidents, injuries, and so on, illnesses, but also the objects as well. Millions of times. Which is more? Just ask yourself, which is more? The times I got what I want, or the times I didn't get what I want? And you realize, oh, of course, it's the times I didn't get what I want. So whenever I got what I want, it was kind of almost like, oh, wow. Lucky, accidental, circumstantial, on the basis of more often not getting what I want, how I want it. But if you stop wanting of any type of wanting of the sense objects, you cannot not get what you want, because you only want one thing, non-sensuality. And that's now implied in sensuality. So sensuality keeps reminding you of your freedom of sensuality. Sense objects keeps reminding you of your imperturbable state.
You can get that not wanting of sensuality instantly.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you just not. If you see.
If you see it on the right level, sure, yeah. You can't get not wanting of sensuality just because I don't want sensuality.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what sensuality is to the full extent.
Yeah.
So first you need to understand what sensuality is, which is what I explained, how we started this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the wanting of the sense objects, not just the sense objects or just the wanting. It's the wanting of these pleasing sight, sound, smell, taste, touches. It's this pressure that I experience on the level of my body, on the level of my senses. So you stop wanting that wanting, which means you also have to stop being concerned with the objects of your sensuality, but start looking at the nature of sensuality, which is it's being wanted. Mm-hmm. So you don't want that which is being wanted in regard to the senses.
Right. Okay, but only once you succeed in that.
Yeah, then you can say I don't want sensuality correctly, because you know what sensuality is.
Then what do you get instead?
Unshakable peace. Freedom from suffering.
Which is
imperturbable state of the mind.
Inconceivable in some ways. Like it's difficult to...
Well, it's inconceivable from the point of view of the sensual domain. So if the mind still takes sensuality for granted, doesn't see the extent of the sensual domain, the domain of imperturbable is inconceivable. But if the mind starts paying attention to the domain of sensuality, discerning it, and by doing so discerning the domain that's free from it, the domain of imperturbable, then it becomes conceivable, it becomes doable. Because you understood. Because sensuality inherently in itself is unpleasant. It's dangerous. It's of very little gratification, not worth even making the effort for that gratification. It's like somebody asking you to pay the lottery ticket $1,000 and the maximum win is $5. Why would you do that? You wouldn't do that. It's ridiculous. And that's what sensuality is. The amount of reward you get to the utmost, most refined sensuality you can imagine is 100th of your investment. Always, every single time. That's why the Buddha gave all those similes like a bone not providing anything but a dog can't stop chewing it. Because he's just mad with it. But you get nothing in return. That's the definition of sensuality, of sensual domain. That's why it's of little gratification. It is not because you romantically pondered over it and you mused how unsatisfactory. No, factually, that's the deal you get from sensuality. For the 1,000 pieces you invested, you get one in return. And you realize, wait a minute, all I need to do is not invest in this and I'll gain 1,000-fold. All I need to do is practice renunciation and I gain 1,000-fold. All I need to do is not do sensuality and I win. And that's the pleasure of jhana as well. That relief of burden, of pressure, of freedom from sensuality, freedom from danger of sensuality. Not just that you invested 1,000, knowing, well, maybe not fully knowing, but in practice you get only one in return, never more. But even that, you can lose your life on account of it. Yeah. So not just that you don't get any reward, you actually get even taken even more. You could lose even more.
More risk, yeah.
Even
Risk
you
is
use exactly.
But the other way,
The other way is risk-free,
risk-free,
debt-free, and loss-free.
you
As like a
win.
perfect advertisement, practice jhana. But no, it is. So whenever the Buddha would say it's of little gratification, little peace, again, it's a factual thing that he would be describing. And because sensuality is of little gratification, little satisfaction, and much greater danger, that's why if you get to understand it, you will abandon it. You cannot understand the nature of sensuality correctly and still want it. Two are mutually exclusive. Understanding of it means not wanting it. And that's why the Buddha would say, the man who engages with sensuality, who seeks happiness, who wants joy. So from this, that's why people engage with sensuality, because that's the only pleasure they know. And that's not necessarily the problem. You use the same criteria. I want pleasure. The senses want pleasure. That's fine. But it's what pleasure you pursue with it. That's the difference. And that's also what the Buddha realized. He said, wait a minute. The pleasure of jhana, the pleasure of withdrawal, the pleasure of renunciation, there's nothing unwholesome about it. So why would I fear the pleasure in itself? I won't fear this pleasure, because it's not unwholesome. And that's what the other suttas would say. The man who wants pleasure would then reflect. And so because he wants pleasure, he will go to sensuality. But then you reflect. And you realize, wait a minute, I want pleasure. Which is more pleasant? Investing 1,000 pieces and getting one in return, maybe, or refraining from investing anything and keeping it all. Oh, so that's more pleasant. So even from the point of view of wanting the pleasure of sensuality, you will get more through restraining that sensuality. That's why sensuality and carelessness go hand in hand. You need to be careless and lose the sight of this perspective in order to be pulled by sensuality and give in. But that's the starting point. Everybody starts by being careless and being sensual within the sensual domain. So you start with a restraint in order to develop perspective on it. When you develop perspective, then you can say no to the right things. And that's why what we said in the other talk, that sensuality is fundamentally not wanted by anyone. Not discerning that, you habitually just go with that arisen wanting of your senses. But you appropriate it and then you think you want it. So you don't deny these sense objects, you don't deny the wanting of sense objects, but you say no to it and you let it endure without giving in at any point of that duration. And then you realize the pain here, the unpleasant aspect, is the aspect of senses suffering on account of not getting the objects. But neither of that is mine. And then eventually those senses will calm down. That's the Buddha gave the simile of the 5 wild animals that you tame. In the beginning, you just peg them onto into a stake on the ground, and they're going to be pulling and ripping and yanking and chewing and trying to escape until they burn all the energy, and then they just sit, and then they'll start to listen. And if that's not working for somebody in someone's practice, it's because they're probably still trying to either deny the wanting of sense objects, as in interfere with it, or are too concerned with denying of the sense objects themselves. Oh, this is super, this is ugly, this is ugly, this is ugly. Which means, whichever way it is, they don't have the perspective on the nature of the sensual domain. But if you do, then you realize, no, it has arisen on its own. Sensuality is there. Eyes want to see. Nose wants to smell, and so on. Don't interfere with that. Just don't welcome it. Don't entertain it. Don't be careless in regard to it.
And they won't be dragging you off into all these places.
They can't.
Unwholesome places.
Only through you giving into it, you get dragged.
But also the attitude that you're talking about, saying no forever.
Yeah, sure, I see. Yeah, I see what you mean. No, absolutely. So, not wanting, the wanting of sense objects needs to be universal. That attitude needs to be developed. This is not just for today and tomorrow that I don't want this. This is for the rest of my life and any lives that might come. The wanting of sense objects will never be wanted, will never be welcomed. It might arise millions of times more for you. Every time it arises, every time it is not welcome and you don't open the door. And eventually it will have to go away. Either way, you will win. You will win by not being bothered, by not losing your investment stupidly, by not exposing yourself to risk. And then on top of it, by discerning the nature of the imperturbable, which in itself it's immeasurably more pleasurable in a wholesome sense, like the pleasure of the first jhana, you can't even compare it to the pleasure of sensuality. It's just incomparable, because two different domains, mutually exclusive. You can't have, I have jhanas and I have sensuality. Sometimes, like I engage in sensuality and establish my engage jhanas. No, that's all sensuality, my friend. Through discerning and abandoning of sensual domain, you discern the domain imperturbable in regard to that domain. And that's the pleasure of the jhanas.
Not just for this weekend.
Exactly. Oh, just while I'm on the retreat, I'll make the effort, but when I go back... No, which means that the future possibility of welcoming sensuality, you welcome that.
Yeah.
And by welcoming the possibility of sensuality, you are still fully engaged with, okay, I'm not going to let you in today, but we both know I'm going to open this door tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you think this person will then go in the meantime? Of course not.
Yeah.
Yet that's the whole point. To not open the door so they leave and never come back. But the only way they will do that is they really see, no, he will never open the door. You have to convince the Mara's daughters and Mara himself that the door will never be open for them ever again. And how long that takes, well, that depends on the power